Bienvenidos a su Magacin Pensamiento Global. Este es un espacio del Programa de Relaciones Internacionales y Estudios Políticos de la Facultad de Estudios a Distancia en la Universidad Militar Nueva Granada. El día de hoy tenemos para ustedes una actividad interesante y una actividad que nos permite ampliar nuestras posibilidades en cuanto a comprender otro idioma y sobre todo escuchar argumentos, incluso técnicos, en otro idioma. Está con nosotros el doctor Mario Cortés Santander. El doctor Mario es colombiano, lleva en Australia cerca de 16 años, entonces ella es angloparlante. Es abogado de la Universidad Libre con especialización en Derecho Constitucional de la misma universidad y además posee una maestría en Relaciones Internacionales. Entonces, en posgrado, el doctor Mario es colega nuestro de la Universidad Nueva Gales del Sur, donde ha investigado problemáticas sociales que afectan a las personas refugiadas, solicitantes de asilo, pueblos indígenas y comunidades LGTBQY+. Y también está con nosotros ya de la casa una de nuestras principales representantes en docencia, la doctora María Cristina Fulaliscano. Ella es politóloga de la Universidad Javeriana, también tiene una maestría en Derechos Humanos y además es diseñadora de modas, es una emprendedora y pues digamos que nos permite ver desde su trabajo como investigadora en derechos humanos y desde sus clases y también desde los aportes que ha hecho este magazine, el cómo se practican los derechos humanos a nivel global. Entonces vamos a hacer una conexión entre el trabajo que ha hecho Mario Cortés con comunidades y también los diferentes niveles de interpretación que se pueden hacer de los fenómenos sociales y la reconciliación conectado con los derechos humanos por parte de la doctora María Cristina. Entonces, en este momento dejamos de hablar español y vamos a escuchar a Mario Cortés y vamos a intentar no solo escuchar, sino también comprender, porque es un tema bien interesante y agradecidos, doctor Mario, con tu presencia. Muchísimas gracias y te escuchamos.
Thanks so much, Ana Maria. For me, it's a privilege to join you today in this wonderful exercise. Thank you, you and all the team for the University Militar Nueva Granada. That I was pretty privileged to be once, many years ago, a teacher. So very proud and happy to see the expansion of the university and accessing in different ways today in an online dynamic. Before to starting, and I will share with you something that I have learned in this journey of a migrant and also in this wonderful place that I live, which is Australia. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I'm in the Bijigal Nation, which is in the eastern part of Sydney, which is the capital city of the state of New South Wales. And I would like to pay my respect to elders, past, present. And also, I would like to acknowledge any First Nation person joining this call today, and whoever will be able to see this dialogue today. I also would like to extend my respect to the First Nations of all the world, very in particular, all the First Nations from the Abya Yala, Latin America, and of course, the ones especially in Colombia, where my backgrounds come from the Chibchas and also Quillacingas and pastors from the southwest of the country. As I said, the intention of today's conversation or presentation will be around two concepts. One, it is about the citizenship concept and human rights. We set up 4 questions, and I will go through those 4 questions and talk a bit of the Australian experience. on my own experiences, and I have to do a disclosure. I'm talking on my behalf. I'm not representing any of the entities or organizations that I have worked. I'm a public servant. So all the work that I have, that I will share with you guys, is based on my journey of the 16 years of living and working in this country. So to start, we will ask the first question, which is, does the recognition of citizenship constitute part of what is understood as a human right? And to start that, I would like to set up a starting point of the definition of citizenship. And for that, I'm going to refer to a Latin American author, which is Mignolo, Walter Mignolo, an Argentinian scholar who has been studying the colonial process and post-colonial processes for many years. He's a well-known professor, and he has several works that you guys can find in internet in English and Spanish. So to continue this conversation, and because the intention of this exercise is to first of all allow ourselves to lose the fear of exposure. I think that it's essential that we get into dynamics of listening material in other languages, so which is a video presentations and etc., but also reading. Okay, so Mignolo refers about the understanding of the modern definition of citizen.
Mario.
Aló. Me dicen que no me ven. ¿Me ven? ¿Me escuchan?
Te escuchamos, no te vemos, la cámara está en blanco.
Ah, pero a ver, ok. Yo tengo mi cámara, te veo a ti, Chris, te veo a ti. Tengo mi cámara activada.
Puede ser parte del problema que estamos teniendo con la señal.
¿Quieres que salga y vuelva a entrar?
Dice Nahor que si puedes apagar y prender la cámara nuevamente. Y presentamos disculpas a toda nuestra audiencia, a nuestros estudiantes y a quienes están conectados por YouTube. Son cosas que pueden pasar en una transmisión en vivo. Estamos haciendo lo mejor para trabajar para ustedes y para que nos acompañen. Entonces, por favor, paciencia. Esto está interesantísimo. Esperemos a ver si logramos. Y si no, quedémonos con el audio, que creo que es lo más importante.
Vale, voy a salir del meeting y vuelvo a entrar, ¿les parece? Para ver si eso tal vez ayuda. Bueno.
Me da miedo que no regreses. No te vayas.
No, yo regreso, no te preocupes. Nebori, regreso, no te preocupes. Solo déjame entrar.
Bueno, entonces, gracias por la paciencia, por el apoyo. Pedimos que nos manden buenas vibras para que esto salga lo mejor posible. Habíamos tenido internet pleno toda la semana, pero bueno, pasan cosas. Entonces, estamos aquí atentos al reingreso del doctor Mario. Muchísimas gracias. Ahí te vemos, te escuchamos perfectamente y qué pena la interrupción, por favor, continuemos. Muchas gracias.
No, that's all right. And thank you, Simon, for allowing us to mix up Spanish and English. I was just saying, yeah, so this is me, Mario. So what I definitely want to study is the definition of citizenship. And what Mignolo does, it is taking us into the journey of what it is citizen, who is a citizen, and what are the duties of a citizen. And of course, we need to think that that concept definitely is connected with the concept of nation and state. Okay, so we are coming to an historical evolution of what we understand as a state today, but far in the 17th century, where all the progress of the society took over to become a nation state. So, but of course, that reference, it has kind of one specific, is very Eurocentric understanding, all right, Eurocentric approach. So, not only Eurocentric because it starts where the main royal kingdoms emerge, which is in the UK and France, but also it was considered a Judeo-Christian development juxtaposed against Buddhism, Confucianism, Islam, and Hinduism, or perhaps any Eurocentric idea of human. So that concept of citizenship has maintained through centuries, and of course, he has had some changes through time. Citizenship become the way to unify one vision of a state, one vision of ethnicity, and one vision of class. In that sense, and this is Mignolo's thoughts, is that citizenship, the concept of citizenship, has to be seen parallel to the idea of racism. Why? Because that concept of mononational state colonize a pluriversal senses of belonging. And here it is another key concept that in First Nations, it is critical to understand. So while the idea of citizenship gives us the understanding that we belong to a state, that we can elect, we can be elected, we have political rights, for First Nations, and what I have seen across my experience and exposure, the First Nations developed the idea of citizens in a different way, and based on the concept of belonging, pertenecer. Pertenecer a algo is not given by the law, is not given by the state. It comes given by the nature. In the concept of the Andes, with the Pachamama, the summa causal, in the Eastern countries, China, Japan, the spirituality brings another idea of that belonging, which is different from the idea of citizenship and the way that Europe in those years target the understanding of humanity. All right. So that's one of the things that I think is quite important for us to understand what is the idea of citizenship and where it comes from. I will suggest to go do a quick search on Google to look for Walter Mignolo, and you will find a really fruitful and informative and historical explanation of the concept per se. Moving forward, on the second question about the concept of citizenship, is the concept of property was recognized in France in the late 17th century. So can community access to land in both Colombia and Australia be considered within the framework of current human rights principles? So the answer to that question, it will be kind of like depends. Where are you coming from, and what time of history are you reading your present? If we move back into the history of Australia, so Australia, it is known for the kangaroos, for the boomerangs, for beaches, for a wonderful landscape that is not just an island, it is pretty much a continent. But the history of Australia comes far beyond of the 18th century when the colonizers came to Australia in 1776. With the context is in France, the French Revolution was happening, in UK, Industrial Revolution was happening, But the history of Australia comes far, and it comes from 65,000 years. Actually, the Australian First Nations are considered the oldest human settled in the world. There are theories that explain that, there are other theories that controvert that, but the understanding of the First Nations in Australia and the proud of being recognized as one of the oldest one is certainly something that it is not well known of many people. And having this conversation with you all, I think that is essential to understand, because we need to start moving, walking away from the Eurocentric understanding of human, walking away from the Eurocentric understanding of citizenship, and allows ourselves to get into the sense of belonging. This is a common ground with the First Nations in the Americas and in Colombia, being Colombia one of the most diverse countries in the world and holding more than 50 different Aboriginal groups. We should feel privileged and proud of that, because those nations hold so much knowledge, information, and an uncountable heritage to humanity that only until a few decades ago we start understanding better. The struggle for many First Nations in the world still goes, undermining the quality of being subject of human rights. Are you guys still with me?
Yeah, here we are. Don't worry.
Okay, please let me know if I'm not clear with anything. Yes, I've been 16 years here, but I'm still, in my learning experience of being trying to speak English in the best way of capacity. So apologies if there is something that is not clearly. Please don't hesitate to raise the hand. I'm more than happy to go through and rephrase it.
It's okay.
Okay, so yeah, so when the Australia, so answer that question about property become essential within the First Nations settings, because in the Australian concept, in the Australian experience, when the British came to this portion of land, a big portion of land, and as an action of colonizing, they use something that in Latin is called the terra nullus, which is no one's land, la tierra de nadie. Therefore, if no one owns this land, what the colonizers can do? Claim it as them. And that's what they did back in time. In Latin America, it happens as well when with the Colon or Christopher Colon experience. And I will do a comment in here. Perhaps for those ones who were not born, or the ones who born before internet, my case, in the 80s, we learn with the books, okay? And in those books, early days, you learn about the history of Latin America, and the history of Latin America was very limited because only talks about 1492, the moment when the Spaniards arrived. And I remember myself asking that question, well, what happened before? But what we asked to learn was the name of the three cruise ships, which was La Pinta, La Niña, y La Santa Maria, pretty much give thanks to Spaniards to arrive to these lands and do what they did. And it's part of the history that we know, but sometimes we do not have the opportunity to see with different eyes. The question will be, what happened before? What was there before 1492? What happened before 1776? There was no history? Where these people, they didn't have agency? Where these people didn't have knowledge? These people didn't have feelings and emotions and sentiments and goals and ambitions? Of course. But the concept of property that they proclaimed was absolutely different. The way that they rely in existence, it is not putting nature there and humanity or humankind here. They are one together. And that's something that later philosophers like Kant and Heidegger, I think it was Heidegger, talk about the understanding of being with others. And those ideas come from knowledge of different latitudes. As I said, in Latin America, the summa causal through the Andes, in China, in Africa with the Ubuntu. So all the common grounds to the First Nations is to see humankind one together with the nature. Therefore, we don't own the property. The air, we need to talk about ownership. Pretty much is the air that own us and set up the destiny of our actions. In that sense, when the settlers came, it wasn't, as we know, in any colonial scenario of domination, they were drastically abusive with the concept of human rights. They, devastate populations. They made a lot of genocides, regardless they were women, kids. They overlap culture, they overlap beliefs, and they impose the ones that were valid in the time. We're talking about monarchy, we're talking about the links of monarchy and the church, and any idea that was out of that Eurocentric Judeo-Christian understanding was very hard to see it. And because it was very hard to see it, and of course the language barriers, the easy way to approach was either you join us with the sword or the cross, or you have to be subjugated. And what happened is, however, saying that, and through history, First Nations in different contexts have established resistant process that has allowed them to establish their own rights, to the right of property. And for example, in the Australian context, that is perhaps one of the flagships of understanding the concept of land rights. Because in history, and we can review this a bit later, Australian case mentions something that for First Nations and in the international law idea is key, the concept of native title, el título indígena, no? That becomes a reference to understand that, hold on, in anywhere that has been human settlers, it cannot be mentioned as a terra nullus. So they have to recognize that in this portion of land, there was people who settle up, who has beliefs, who has a complex or social and cultural organization that was just different from the one that the European settlers have in the time. That was a key reference from First Nation that progressively have important impacts in national legislation and international legislations. Of course, the concept of property and the concept of citizenship, it could be questioned as well. And I just don't want to go too far from certain things that were happening in our reality a couple of years ago. Do you guys remember what happened in COVID time? Do you remember the times of the COVID, the pandemic? Okay, that was a breaking point because, and this is what we see, a lot of people who was living overseas in other countries, regardless they were humans, regardless they could be aliens, talking about temporary pass into a country, they have restrictions in exercising their rights. So, for example, in Australia, what happened in the time of the pandemic, and unfortunately, a lot of the international students from all around the world who came to study English and to live and to work, they have to face a very complex moment, which was being asked by the Prime Minister in the time to return to the homes. So when the pandemic was in the peak of the difficulties, where no one knew what to do, where everyone was dying, with everyone, the answer of the government, of the national government, was say, guys, thank you for coming, but you have to return because we cannot hold you. And in many other countries, it happened the same. But then the question is, okay, what are our human rights? Yes, I'm a citizen because I'm from a specific country. I'm from Colombia, I'm from Bangladesh, I'm from England, but I'm not a national from I'm not a national of the Australian country. So that prevent me to access to certain privilege. Perhaps in Colombia, the response was different. I believe that the time of migration in Colombia with a lot of diasporas from other parts of Latin America was happening, particularly Venezuelan, happened the same. And I will ask you, my friends who are seeing this conversation today, if you're interested in studying online, if you're interested in studying international relations, it's because somehow you have the desire of learning more than what you have seen in your own context. You want to see what is beyond of Monserrate. You want to see what is beyond the church. You want to see what is beyond our frontiers, right? You want to know more what is happening in Europe, what is happening in the US, what is happening in China, because any reason you want to see beyond, and that's fantastic. And the fact that you want to learn another language is a footprint of your desire. And I will have to congratulate you for that, because that is an important thing to do. But please do not remember where you're coming from, and allow yourself to do that internal journey and process of remember, where do you belong? And where do you belong is thinking towards your ancestors, your parents, your abuelos and abuelas, your aunties, uncles, and all the people that comes behind you, right? So as I said, and as I say in the current generations, look, the milk doesn't come from the fridge. There is a cow involved in the process. There is a patient that is helping, to bring that piece of milk in your fridge, but there is something beyond that, all right? And unfortunately, these conversations that are just digital conversations, and in this dynamic that we are living on, which is very quick and fast and instantaneous, sometimes doesn't give us that historical context or cultural context that is essential, not only for knowledge, but it's essential for living, for working, and to relate with your peers. Right. Saying that those process of entitlement of property has been difficult. In the case that I know a bit more, in the New South Wales, Nueva Gales del Sur, the state where I live and work, there is legislation that has been written in relation to recognize rights of the land to Aboriginal people. But that legislation, although it is a fruitful legislation, it has more than 40 years that is reviewed now and then, is a complex legislation, because the context of Australia, since the settlers arrived, has embedded in the system serious understanding of race. And when I talk about serious understanding of race, unfortunately, we have to talk about discrimination. I will share with you. When Australia became a federation, Australia is a federation, Australia is a monarchy. A lot of people don't know that Australia is a monarchy. Yes, Prince Charles, or who was Prince Charles, is the king chart, so it's our king, is my king. But we have a parliamentary system, most bipartisan. It's a constitutional system, but there is a lack of Bill of Rights, right? So you will see an Australian known as an important country, a solid and economic society, but being a federation, it lacks of the concept of Bill of Rights, la Carta de Derechos, all right? Something that if we compare with the Colombian Constitution is quite generous. And in particular, after the 1992 Constitution, where all the human rights and the rights of first, second, and third generations were proclaimed. And in particular, the First Nations rights, when they create an indigenous jurisdiction, they allocate entity even for the culture and the understanding, and they give the opportunity for them to and respect through the indigenous jurisdiction. Is that real or not in practice? That's another thing, but it's in the legislation. In the Australian context, that legislation perhaps is a bit more little. And why? Because when the nation becomes, in 1901, the concept of citizenship was not embedded. It was the concept of nation. And in the time, you will have to think who arrived to Australia with the first settlers. So it was people from UK, progressively, later on time, people from Scotland and Ireland were the first migrant. But what is in common with those kind of like migrants? They were white migrants. They coming from the Commonwealth countries, and they have restriction on the settling. So in Victoria and Melbourne, there is a wonderful museum of the migration, would explain the history of how the country comes a country where migration becomes essential, and nowadays is recognized as one of the most important things, which is true. Australia is a diverse country that provides a Black heritage, which is indigenous, a white heritage, which is from the settlers, and a mixed color coming from all the migrants that from 20th century has immigrated. We're talking about diaspora from Asia, we're talking about from Middle East, from Latin Americas, and that make a very multicultural society in progress, I would have to say. And unfortunately, First Nations, they have it very hard from the beginning, and I still have it. I see that Anna Maria is raising the question, raising your hand. Yes, go ahead.
Sí, the time is gold, and
Again.
Need conclusion. Sorry.
No problem. No, absolutely. I did. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for
sorry,
coming.
Mario. I think
Yes,
that
sure.
we can. I'm sorry. I think that we can pick up also Sophia's question, and then
Yeah,
have
sure.
like I can make some comments, and then we can answer Nabor and Sophia's comment, right? So Sophia, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you very much. About I'm sure a lot of things about my classroom or about the person before me, but I think that is more about the perspective in the sense of the human right, because a cause of the immigration, we have to share a country, yeah, and pay the other human rights, yeah, because yeah, like my classmate said, we think that my country is best, or maybe what other shows, but well, I think it's more like education is a cultural thing that you have to respect and include a other person that is in a bad situation.
Okay, Sophia, well, I will try like to, before giving the word again to Mario, I will try to make like some comments around what our topic for today was. Maybe it is important to understand that the first thing that is important here is that when we talk about citizenship, we talk about identity. And I think that Mario was also making some comments in some remarks related to this, and it is that identity is a moving process, it's a dynamic process, and we don't have the same identity in different places, right? I also have a question for Mario, and it's like, where do you feel from? Because you said like Charles King is king, and I was like, oh my God, but you're from here, right? And since I understand that it's a dynamic thing, and a dynamic process of, yeah, you belong where, and you don't only belong to land, you belong to your cultural things, to your beliefs, to your art, your traditions, your food. You belong and you construct identity in different terms along life. And it's not the same identity we have when we are 5 or 10 or when we are a teenager that when we are adults, right? And when we're a teacher and when we change the things we do, we construct and we build up an identity, right? But I would say that in terms of all these things, and as Sophia was saying, some sentence about the cultural things that are important here. Art is also a subject that helps us constructing identity, and it's really quite stronger, maybe stronger than the political processes, because we all think that we belong to, I don't know, some space, some, in our case, some departamento, some municipio, right? Because we built up that feeling of belonging, right? But we don't care about, I don't know, when we go to vote or who's the political party in this moment. And moreover, when we are young, we don't think and we don't give the importance to that, right? But music But when we talk, for example, in the case of Colombia, about the cumbia, vallenato, música llanera, and in terms of the youth, when they listen to rock or when they listen to rap or whatever, we built up a way of belonging. And that identity, that moving identity, that dynamic identity is, even if we mind it or not, is related to earth, to land. Because it's different the way how I belong as a Colombiano or as a Colombiana to Barranquilla than the way how I belong to el altiplano cundiboyacense, right? There's an author that is called Peter Wade, and Peter Wade is he's Britain, and he makes some anthropology studies here, saying or studying the way how Colombia turned into a process of Caribbean process. I mean, como se Caribbeanizó the country, right? When after the 90s, and as Mario also said, after the Constitution of 1991, when they open up to recognize that we are Black, that we are women, that we are LGBT, that we are not only men, that we are indigenous people, and that we all have the chance to participate, right? The citizenship ends up to be just the document, because a lot of people, and here you as students and Mario as well might know that here we have regions where they don't have the identity. Yeah, Oscar, don't turn down your hand, or we're gonna have another space for questions. Don't worry. It's not only the document, it's also the process of knowing that you're related in your feelings, in your references, in your ancestors to someplace, right? And here in Colombia, we have had also a lot of problems related to land. And we take off the land of some community, you're taking off from them one of the specific things, one of the specific elements that build up their identity. So that's really complicated, and that's really something that change up the way how you talk about the race and the culture and the rights, because it's not only the way how we try to put on like this is the Bill of Rights, or this is the 15th right to the right of a nationality or something like that, but you're taking off some community or some people's important ways of think, feeling, and living a place, right? So in terms of all this, definitely we have the concept of culture, the concept of identity, and maybe trying to answer to Nabor's question, do we have to fight to feel that, like, you know, like to impose that we are better or something like that? No, definitely not. The recent times and recent history show us that not necessarily, but it's a fact in history that communities or societies that has fight for their land get another type of results. And the Aztecas and the Aztecas and the Incas, they were not moreover the Aztecas, they were not peaceful at all. I mean, like, we have to understand that violence is also a way of seeing the world, right? They fight, and they were warriors because they believed in their way and in their cosmovision to protect something, right? Just that between that fight between the Spanish and the Aztecas, by the technology of war, they lost a lot, right? But that doesn't mean that keep the process of knowing who you are, of having clear where you belong to, necessarily has to be related to a process of fighting. I mean, like, and I know we can talk about this the whole, I don't know, like 1 or 2 hours more. I want to give the word to Oscar and Diego that also had some questions and they raised their hands. But try to think in between all these things that we have a lot of terms related, and we do understand in terms of time the same concepts in different ways, right? So, sorry, Diego. Oscar, I don't know if you're still there in the session. Oscar Javier Rodriguez.
Yes, Mario Cristina, I'm here.
Yeah, we'll listen to you.
Thank you. Mario, I want to ask you something. according to your experience and your knowledge, how we can build a real national feeling? Because in my opinion, I think the only thing that really connects us is the Colombian soccer team, and that's it. Because we are multicultural, I don't think we have a real national feeling in Colombia, because we are, I don't know how to say that, by regions. Maybe the Caribbean coast, the Paisas, the Tolimas people, and I don't know what is your opinion about that.
Yeah. So if may I thank so much for your comment. That was Diego. Thank you so much for the comment. And I'm just gonna quickly answer, connect, because I wanna Maria Cristina, I would prefer to have that dialogue instead of the presentation, but I just want to wrap up just the comment of the question of Nebora and put together things. So I would say, Nebora, the citizenship, it was a construction that was trying to protect the dignity of certain people. The beginning, right? At the beginning, that was the concept. At the same as property. If you study the liberal theories about who was able to own property, it was only specific people, most of them men. Women didn't have agency at the time. The Greeks talk about citizens, immaculate democracy, but they have slavery as well. So when we talk about citizenship and we talk about perhaps those moments of conflict, and yes, you're right, you see that humanity navigates in that dilemma between the winning, so the wishing more always, and sometimes that wish it could be abusive across our surroundings, and it's when you cross the line and you abuse other ones. So and perhaps I understand where your coming comes from, Nebora, is yes, you it's kind of like defeat or be defeated. But I think that is a very narrow. I respect that, and I respect that. I understand where it comes from. We comes in a country with that dichotomy has been pretty much from the beginning of our modern reality, which is 19th century, when we emancipate from the Spaniards. But the question will say, like, do we still need to kill someone else to prevail my living, my identity, to own the land in this century? And that's like, do we really need it? Do we really need all that blood going through us as rivers to get to this point where still that an inequality exists? So I mean, for me, it's hard to process it. Therefore, I'm connecting with other comments of the questions. What is the notion of nation? Look, perhaps the first exercise that we need to do to build up, and I'm very careful using the concept of nation, because nowadays we hear in the international relations arena the extreme presence of nationalism, and that's complicated. That's very complex. History and Europe face serious and delicate moments of reality based on the nationalism. The Second World War, what happened in Germany was an idea of nationalism, was an idea of race, was an idea of excluding others one. And look where it ended up. So I think that we need to kind of be careful with the concept of nation, and perhaps thinking about what is beyond citizenship, what is beyond national, and it's about the existence. And I think that in that sense, and with this we'll wrap up, First Nations across the globe, have that understanding of respecting others from the beginning. And they are nurturing from the beginning. And they put themselves an exposure to the Mother Earth from the beginning. How? Through culture. How? Through country. In the original settings in Australia, the word country that you will translate in Spanish as a país or campo in the Australian context and English context represents where the space where they're coming from. And country for the First Nations not only refers about the land, it refers to the earth, to the fire, to everything that is surrounded and is one and belong to it, right? And it's wonderful to hear that, you know, I can live a dignified life without undermining someone else. And you see, First Nations, and I'm not, I definitely will have to say, look, Aztecas, and they were colonizers. They invade small towns. I mean, I'm not putting as a dignity or una deidad. I'm saying that they, in the reality, they establish, and actually they even establish laws and protocols of justice. What if I hurt someone? What if? And if you guys remember, one of the first human right is the right of life, of living. And in many countries, and now, Noburi, I'm glad that you mentioned the Sierra Nevada, because I remember one really great talk from important journalist. Unfortunately, he passed away many years ago, Jaime Garzón. Perhaps you have heard about him.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that when the Constitution of Colombia, the 1991 Constitution, was translated in indigenous languages, they were thinking about proclaiming the first or the basic right, which is respect the life of others, respect the life as yours. With that one, will be enough to move around. Of course.
Maybe we can listen to Diego that has his hand raised, and
absolutely.
Estefania Beltran. I'm sorry.
You too, Christina. I would like to listen to you.
Yeah, sure. Diego, you have the word. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me there?
Yes, sure, Diego.
There. Hi, good afternoon. I just want to make a brief question here. And the thing is, I used to listen countries have an identity and some common vision within the citizens on how they think on their own country. So one example is the American dream. Americans used to believe on the American dream, and they're like bind as society on that ideal. On the other side, I think we as Colombians, we do not have a very clear idea of what is something like the Colombian dream. And I just wanted to ask you if the presence of a state, because we understand Colombia's state is not present in all regions, and probably because of our geography, that's difficult for the state to be on every place. But I just wanted to know if the presence of state is important or mandatory to build an identity, a common identity within citizens. And thank you.
Okay, thank you, Diego. We're going to listen to Estefania also, if you still want to talk, Estefania.
Okay, teacher, thank you for that. I have to ask something different. I would like to change a little bit the topic. It was about the COVID, because I wanted to ask something when the teacher talked about the COVID. So I think that the COVID was a really big problem here and in all the world. And I have never understand what happened with that, because that begin with some so big, and also that disappeared, and we don't have any answer why that disappeared. Yeah, that was a really hard problem from economy and a lot of problems in the world. And I would like to ask more about the COVID. What do you think about that? If you think that it maybe was created for the government, or maybe what happened with that? I don't know. I have that question when you talk about COVID.
Okay, Stefania, thank you. So Mario, I don't know if you want to try to answer those two participations in maybe 5 minutes. And then, as I know that we're a little bit late, but also we have our technical staff that has to go ahead with other activities. 5 minutes to answer questions and maybe another 5 minutes to make a closure comment about this activity, right? So
Yeah,
Mario, you have the word.
Absolutely, Maria Cristina. Thank you, and thank you, Diego, and it was Sofia for the question. So I think, Diego, you nailed the question. I think that's a really fruitful question, and I actually um, congratulate for the question. And I think that is a question that we should all ask ourselves as a Colombian citizens or as a Colombian nation, but more important, as a humans who live in that portion of land named Colombia, right? I think that one of the reasons, one way to build up that concept, Diego, perhaps is allowing yourself to see other notions of existence. So you might do that when you study law, or when we did study law, when you study a bit of the history of states and styles or ways of governance, you will see difference and how you see different countries have had. But I will ask you, nowadays internet give you brief summaries of how all of that stuff. For us, took us 5 years to understand it, or 2 years. Nowadays, you guys can do it in a brief time. But I think that, look, Diego, the Constitution, 1991 Constitution, allowed to see a Colombia as a diverse country. In Latin America, constitutions, a very progressive one, like the Bolivian Constitution and Ecuadorian, they talk about pluricultural nation. So they are not mentioned that it's just one nation that rules all ones. No, it's not the only ring that rules the other ones. It is one of many. Therefore, you need to see that your voice is not the only one that really exists in the room. There is other voices. And to recognize those voices, you need to learn to hear your own voice and to hear the other voices. And in example, you were mentioning about regions. Look, allow yourself one day to be costeño. Allow yourself one day to be boyaco. Allow yourself one day to, but go beyond that. Because in that piece of territory, you will see another piece of the puzzle that make the big map of Colombia. And saying that Colombia has an incredible, believe me, incredible diverse sense of living. When I was talking with one of, she was the representative until before the United Nations to the Indigenous Committee. She was my teacher in the master, and I approached to her, look, how we can make all of this stuff better. And she told me, Mario, but all the work that has been done in international relations and in particular in the indigenous people comes from you guys. And I asked, what do you mean? What do you mean? And I said, yes, from the indigenous people from Latin America. And that process of resistance has happened through many years, through many bloods. And I think that has set up a reference to understand how we can do it, and deeper, just learning, having these conversations, watching movies, watching documentaries with a different eye, out of that Eurocentrical eye, and allow yourself to see other realities. Perhaps that's the answer to your question, Diego. Knowledge is an important tool. It is important just to make sure that you find different and diverse resource for you to build up. Traveling is a good way of doing it. You guys have the opportunity for traveling, and I answer to your question, Maria Cristina, where do I feel, where I do belong? For any migrant, your heart is kind of like split in two if you come from one nation. Of course, I'm a Colombian. And actually, when I was in Australia, beyond being Colombian, I feel more like Latin American, because I realize that the strength that Latin American people have towards working to do the things in the best way of the capacity doesn't compare with any others, perhaps with other backgrounds where they've been subject of colonization. When you see incredible Asian working, incredible African working, so make me feel proud of that sense of Latin Americanism, of course, colonialism. So Colombianism. If you travel, you will find anywhere that you travel a bit of identity. If you have the chances to travel to any other places, I've been privileged to travel many places. I see a lot of wonderful things in the countries that reminds my own context. And I say, damn, humankind, it could be wonderful anywhere, regardless the color, the language, and the background.
Yeah.
We can do better, yes, but that's a personal exercise that is great to work with others and to share with other people, like what we're doing today. Thank you.
Mario, well, thank you for your participation, and I will really thank in a very special way all the students that are connected today. Congratulations for making this effort to try to listen and to try to participate. One of our main objectives as a career is also to improve in the second or even third language, processes of education, as Mario said, also is very important, and is the first door that we need to hit to keep going on in terms of our knowledge. I know that maybe most of you or a lot of you would like to have a second part. I talked for me when I said that definitely we need a second part of this conversation in terms not only of the examples that are in Australia, but also this subject of nation, identity, cultural process, citizenship, nowadays is alive, absolutely alive, even though we have this maybe difficult conversations in terms of the people that is leading the world. When nation turns to be maybe a negative thing, but maybe it reminds some other historical processes that are not the best we had as a humankind. But also we as Colombians, we need to rethink, as Diego said, which one is the Colombian dream. I think that we have never think about it. I think that we have never reflect on the thing that how are we constructing our process of dream or country, or of dreaming our lives in this land, right? So for my, at least in my opinion, definitely we need a second part. I think that Ana Maria would agree with me that we can make another second part. And another time with less technical problems and things like that. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for the people that get connected in YouTube. Thanks to our staff, our technical staff. And Mario, this is your home. You're welcome any other time. And as the virtual thing allowed us to reconnect in another chance, in another session, I think all of our students and some other people will really be interested in coming with us here to have this conversation. Ana Maria, you can make the closure part of this session, please.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos y todas por acompañarnos. Este es nuestro primer magazine en otro idioma y es nuestro primer magazine con la participación de estudiantes en la misma sala. Me parece que ha sido un éxito. Tecnológicamente pedimos disculpas, pero de todos modos agradecemos tanto a la doctora María Cristina Fula como al doctor Mario Cortés Santander por su participación, por su apertura, por su paciencia. Lo mismo a nuestros estudiantes que estuvieron participantes y también expectantes de esta nueva experiencia. Es un reto para nosotros. Entonces, pues desde el Magacin Pensamiento Global, agradeciendo la presencia de la doctora María Cristina Fula, del doctor Mario Cortés Santander desde Australia, agradeciéndole que haya madrugado con nosotros. Les queremos dar las gracias desde el Programa de Relaciones Internacionales y Estudios Políticos de la Facultad de Estudios a Distancia de la Universidad Militar Este es un espacio que estamos construyendo con ustedes y para ustedes, y esperamos que en una próxima entrega podamos disfrutar también de la compañía de nuevos panelistas y, por qué no, en otros idiomas. Un abrazo gigante y que estén muy bien. Hasta luego.
Gracias. Thank you.